They kicked me out of my own room. My parents handed the space I grew up in, the walls that once carried my dreams, to my brother's obsession with video games. I walked out with nothing but a suitcase and a broken heart, while Mark celebrated his new studio. For months, I disappeared into silence, building a life from scratch, haunted by their betrayal. But secrets have a way of crawling back into the light, and when the family gathered 1 year later, everything they tried to bury, the favoritism, the lies, the inheritance, came crashing down on them, not me. I never thought the day would come when the place I called home would feel like enemy territory. My room, the only corner of the house where I could breathe, dream, and heal from the weight of life, was suddenly no longer mine. I was 34, not a teenager, but the sting of being told I didn't belong still cut deeper than I could have imagined. My parents didn't sit me down for a conversation. They didn't even mask it with gentleness. Instead, it was a cold decree. "Sarah, you need to move out. Mark needs your room. It's better for all of us." At first, I laughed, a short, bitter laugh I couldn't control. "You're kidding, right?" My mother's face didn't twitch. She just stood with her arms crossed, her lips pressed into a line I'd seen 100 times before, the same line that meant her decision was final. My father avoided my eyes, fiddling with the television remote as if he could mute the confrontation away. And then there was Mark, my younger brother by 6 years, leaning casually against the wall, smirking as though he had already won. In his hand, a brand new gaming headset gleamed, the symbol of his newest obsession. "It's not fair," I said, my voice breaking as I looked from one parent to the other. "I've been helping with bills, groceries, everything, while Mark spends his days streaming to an audience of—" "What? 5 people? And you're throwing me out so he can have my room?" "Sarah," my mother interrupted, her tone sharper than glass. "Your brother has potential. He just needs the right environment to thrive. You've had your time here. Now it's his turn." Her words were worse than any slap. My mother, the woman who had comforted me after heartbreaks, who had whispered encouragements when I doubted myself, had become a stranger overnight. I searched her eyes for some trace of the woman I knew, but she looked through me as though I was just another obstacle in Mark's way. Mark chuckled low. "Don't make this harder than it is, Sarah. I need a proper setup. Sponsors want professional space. Besides, aren't you too old to be living at home anyway?" His smirk widened, daring me to argue. I felt my hands tremble. Rage, humiliation, sorrow. All of it tangled into one unbearable knot in my chest. My father cleared his throat and muttered, "Just pack up, Sarah. This is the right thing." He didn't even glance at me, so that was it. Years of carrying responsibility, of being the reliable one, meant nothing compared to Mark's fantasy of becoming a gaming star. I went upstairs to my room, the room I painted myself in warm shades of cream, the room that held shelves of books and mementos of a life I'd tried to build. My suitcase lay open on the bed as I shoved clothes inside with shaking hands. Each fold of fabric felt like another betrayal. My sanctuary was being stripped away, piece by piece, memory by memory, for someone who hadn't earned it. When I returned downstairs, my suitcase trailing behind me, Mark was already at the door. He held out his hand. In it, the small silver key that once belonged to me glinted under the light. Except now, it wasn't mine. He twirled it between his fingers, then pocketed it with a grin that made my skin crawl. "Thanks for the upgrade, sis," he said, his voice laced with mockery. I wanted to scream, to tell them all how cruel and absurd this was. But my throat closed. The words withered before they reached my lips. Instead, I dragged my suitcase across the threshold, each step echoing louder than the last. The air outside was colder than I expected, or maybe I was just hollow, emptied out by the people I trusted most. That was when I heard it. My father's voice, low, almost a whisper, but sharp enough to pierce through my heart. She was never the child we needed. The words froze me in place. My grip tightened on the suitcase handle, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. Never the child they needed? All the nights I stayed late at work to help with bills. All the times I drove my mother to appointments, supported my father when his health declined, or covered for Mark's irresponsibility. None of it mattered. In their eyes, I was disposable, a placeholder until the son they adored needed more space. I didn't turn back. I couldn't let them see the tears burning in my eyes. But as I walked away from the house, the streetlights casting long shadows around me, something inside me shifted. Part of me died in that moment, the part that believed in unconditional love from family, but another part stirred, a quiet ember that whispered I wasn't done. They thought they had ended me by giving away my room. They thought pushing me out would erase me. But what they didn't realize was that by shutting that door, they opened another. I didn't know yet how or when, but I knew one thing. This wasn't the end of my story. It was only the beginning. The first night in my new apartment, I sat on the floor because I had no furniture. The mattress delivery wouldn't arrive until next week, so it was just me, the echo of cracked walls and the hum of traffic outside. The place smelled faintly of mildew, and the paint on the ceiling curled in tired spirals, like the apartment had given up on itself long before I arrived. I told myself I'd only stay here temporarily, but deep down, I knew temporary could stretch into years when you had nowhere else to go. Money became my new prison. I worked mornings at a coffee shop, afternoons cleaning offices, and took the bus home long after midnight. My body ached constantly, and sometimes when the exhaustion was too much, I would just sit by the window and stare at the flickering street lamp outside. Dinner was instant noodles most nights, the kind you buy in bulk because it's cheap and fills the stomach even if it starves the soul. There were moments I wondered if I should have begged my parents harder, pleaded for a little compassion. But then I remembered the cold look on my mother's face, the silence of my father, and Mark's smirk. They had already chosen who mattered, and it wasn't me. I remember sitting cross-legged on the floor one night, my laptop balanced on a cardboard box I used as a table. I typed out a single line. What do you do when the people who should love you most treat you like you're disposable? My fingers hovered over the keyboard as the words stared back at me. I wasn't sure if anyone would ever read them, but writing them felt like breathing after being underwater too long. So I kept writing. I wrote about the night I lost my room, about how betrayal feels heavier when it comes from blood, and about the quiet ache of eating alone while knowing your family chose someone else over you. I didn't name them, but I didn't need to. Anyone who had lived through family favoritism could recognize the pain. To my surprise, people responded. Strangers left comments like, "I thought I was the only one," and "Your story feels like mine." For the first time since leaving home, I didn't feel completely invisible. Every message reminded me that I wasn't just surviving, I was connecting. Still, late at night, when the glow of the screen faded and silence reclaimed the room, doubt gnawed at me. I stared at my reflection in the dark window and asked silently, if you were thrown out by your own parents, what would you do? Would you crumble? Or would you fight to make a name for yourself? I didn't have the answer yet. Maybe I was asking the audience out there, the ones who stumbled upon my words. Weeks turned into months. My routine was brutal, but writing gave me oxygen. And then it happened. One morning, I woke to find my phone buzzing with notifications. My latest post, about how betrayal cuts deepest when you share the same last name, had gone viral. Thousands of shares, hundreds of comments, people confessing their own scars, people thanking me for saying what they couldn't. I sat there in stunned silence, my cheap instant coffee cooling in my hands. My words had reached further than I ever imagined. The girl who had been kicked out with a suitcase was suddenly a voice people listened to. But the internet is unpredictable. Alongside the support came whispers I couldn't ignore. Anonymous comments hinted that someone close to me might have seen the blog. One in particular made my blood run cold. Careful. Families don't like their dirty laundry aired, especially yours. That night, as I scrolled through the flood of responses, an email popped up. The subject line read, "Your writing has power. Let's talk." My hands shook as I opened it. It was from an editor at a well-known digital magazine, offering me a chance to contribute as a guest writer. She praised my raw honesty, the way my words drew readers in. I should have felt triumphant, but a knot of unease twisted in my stomach. because in the midst of all the praise, a thought clawed at me. What if my parents read this? What if Mark read this? I hadn't named names, but the story was theirs as much as it was mine. I closed my laptop, heart pounding. The hum of the traffic outside felt louder than ever, like the city itself was warning me. I pressed my back against the peeling wall and stared into the darkness, wondering. If my words had reached strangers across the country, what would happen when they circled back to the very people I was writing about? Back at my parents' house, things weren't as perfect as they pretended. While I was scraping by in a cramped apartment, Mark was sinking deeper into a pit of his own making. The new gaming studio wasn't a success story. It was a shrine to his delusion. He had poured money into high-end chairs, neon lights, and custom PCs, none of which paid for themselves. Sponsorships never came. The audience he bragged about was a handful of kids who tuned in more to mock him than to admire. Debt crept in quietly at first, but soon it roared. Credit cards maxed out. Payday loans stacking. The equipment that was supposed to make him a star became anchors pulling him under. My parents, desperate to keep up the image of their golden boy, sold their old sedan, the car that had carried me to school plays, job interviews, even the hospital once. That car was gone, traded for Mark's fantasy. The whispers began with neighbors, then relatives picked them up, rolling them around at family dinners. "They threw Sarah out for him?" someone murmured. "A daughter who helped with bills gone? And now they're paying his debts?" Another voice. "They're destroying themselves for a son who refuses to grow up." I heard about these whispers secondhand, but the sting was sharp. Their hypocrisy was no longer invisible. It was being noticed, dissected, judged by others. For a moment, I felt vindicated, but that validation didn't erase the ache of betrayal. Then came the discovery that turned my stomach. I was sorting through old documents I had saved on a flash drive, copies of letters from my late aunt, my mother's older sister. She had been wealthy, private, and childless. Her letters to me were kind, often hinting that she admired my resilience. As I read them again, I wondered what became of her estate. So I searched. The will was public record. What I found made my chest tighten. My aunt's estate was massive, enough to change anyone's life. And according to the most recent filings, my parents were maneuvering to hand all of it to Mark. They were listed as executors, and Mark was the sole named beneficiary. My name was nowhere. It was as if I never existed. The betrayal cut deeper than ever. They hadn't just taken my room. They hadn't just chosen him over me in the moment. They had planned to erase me from our family's future altogether. I wanted to scream, but all I could do was laugh, a hollow sound that echoed in my empty apartment. They thought they were protecting him, but in reality, they were setting up their own downfall. The universe delivered the twist I never expected. One night, unable to sleep, I scrolled through Mark's live stream. His face filled the screen, bleary-eyed, a beer can in one hand. He slurred his words as he ranted about fake friends and haters who didn't understand his grind. But then he slipped. "They don't get it," he said, swaying in his chair. "My parents sold their stupid vacation house for me. That's love, man. They'd do anything for me. Even Sarah, well, screw her. She doesn't matter." He laughed, but the chat erupted. Viewers clipped the moment, spreading it like wildfire. Within hours, the video was on forums, gossip threads, even local community groups. My parents' sacrifice, the one they tried so hard to hide, was laid bare in front of strangers. By morning, the whispers had turned into shouts. Relatives called, demanding answers. "You sold the lake house? For him? And what about Sarah?" The shame they tried to bury had become public spectacle. I watched it unfold from my phone, my heart pounding. Part of me wanted to hide, to stay invisible, but another part of me, the part that had been silenced for too long, felt the first surge of power. They couldn't bury me forever. Their secrets had slipped out, not from my mouth, but from Mark's. As I lay in bed that night, the city noise humming outside my window, I couldn't help but wonder, with the truth spreading so fast, would anyone finally stand on my side? Or would I still be alone, fighting against a family that had already decided I didn't belong? The video of Mark's drunken live stream spread faster than wildfire, and for once, I wasn't the one blamed. My parents scrambled to control the narrative, calling relatives to explain, spinning half-truths into excuses. But the damage was done. Their golden boy had cracked their perfect image wide open, and the world was watching. I knew I couldn't sit back. For too long, I'd been their scapegoat, their invisible daughter who swallowed pain in silence. Now, silence became my weapon. I began collecting everything: screenshots of Mark's debts, bank statements he carelessly left on social media, proof of my parents selling assets to clean up his mess. Piece by piece, I built a quiet arsenal. I wasn't planning on war with fists or screaming matches. I was planning a war with truth. Meanwhile, my blog wasn't just a diary anymore. It had become a community. The more I wrote, the more people reached out, sharing stories of favoritism, betrayal, and toxic families. Readers told me they cried while reading my words, that they finally felt seen. When a podcast network reached out, asking if I would record episodes based on my writing, I hesitated at first. Speaking aloud meant risking exposure, but the thought of my voice echoing beyond the screen lit something inside me. I recorded the first episode in my small apartment, my voice trembling but steadying with every word. I spoke about betrayal, about the cruelty of being erased by those who should protect you, and about the quiet strength of survival. At the end, I asked, if your parents betrayed you, would you forgive them? Or would you finally cut the cord? I left the question hanging, a rope for listeners to grab. The episode exploded. Within a week, hundreds of thousands had listened. Then it climbed to millions. My inbox overflowed with messages from strangers who treated me like a confidant. Each one poured gasoline on the fire in my chest. This wasn't just my story anymore. It was a mirror reflecting thousands of silent struggles. But with visibility came consequences. The whispers among relatives turned into storms. "Did you hear Sarah's podcast?" they asked. "She's talking about her family. She's talking about them." My parents started to panic. At church, they avoided eye contact. At gatherings, they arrived late, left early. They were no longer admired. They were pitied. Mark, however, reacted differently. Instead of shame, he reacted with fury. He saw my growing influence as a direct attack. One night, while I sat editing a new podcast episode, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was a message from him. "You think you're clever," it read. "You think you're winning because a bunch of strangers listen to your whining? Let me tell you something. You don't know the real story. You don't know the secret." I stared at the screen, my breath caught in my throat. My heart raced as I read the words again. The secret? What was he talking about? My fingers hovered over the keyboard, tempted to reply, but I didn't. Instead, I saved the message, adding it to my collection of evidence. The weight of his words lingered. What secret could be bigger than the betrayal I already knew? They had taken my room, sold our family's vacation home, erased me from my aunt's will, and fed Mark's delusion while discarding me. What could possibly be worse? That night, I lay in bed, unable to sleep. The city outside buzzed with life, but my apartment felt suffocating. His message replayed in my mind, over and over like a riddle I couldn't solve. You don't know the real story. You don't know the secret. I closed my eyes, my chest tight. For the first time since I left that house, I felt a chill of fear crawl up my spine. Mark wasn't bluffing. There was something else hidden beneath the surface of our family's lies. And when it surfaced, I knew it wouldn't just shake them, it would shake me too. The day of the will reading felt like a trial. Everyone came dressed in shades of expectation, dark suits, stiff dresses, and polished shoes that clicked against marble floors. I walked into the lawyer's office with my head high, though inside my chest, my heart thudded so loudly I thought everyone could hear it. The air was heavy, like the oxygen itself was holding its breath. Mark was already there, sitting smugly between our parents. His suit was slightly too big, his tie crooked, but he looked proud, confident, as if he already knew the verdict. My mother's hand rested on his arm protectively, while my father adjusted his glasses and gave me a glance sharp enough to cut. Around us, relatives whispered, their eyes darting between Mark and me. No one needed to say it aloud. They were certain the fortune would be his. The lawyer, a gray-haired man with an air of precision, tapped the table gently to silence the room. "We are gathered today to review the last will and testament of Margaret Hayes." My aunt's name rolled through the room like a sacred bell. For a brief second, I remembered her laughter, her way of looking at me as if she saw more than I allowed the world to see. He cleared his throat and began reading. At first, it was the usual legal jargon: dates, names, responsibilities. The room hummed with barely concealed impatience. Mark leaned back in his chair, already basking in his imagined victory. My parents sat upright, stiff with anticipation. And then came the words that shattered their world. "To my niece, Sarah Hayes, I leave the entirety of my estate. I have watched her endure trials with strength and dignity. I have seen her carry burdens that were not hers to bear. She is the rightful heir to my legacy." The silence was explosive. Gasps broke through the air like shattered glass. My mother's face drained of color, her hand slipping from Mark's arm. My father leaned forward, eyes wide, as if he hadn't heard correctly. Mark's smirk faltered, then collapsed into open-mouthed disbelief. I sat perfectly still, though inside I trembled. Every word felt surreal, like a dream I might wake from. But the lawyer continued, his voice steady. "This decision was made after long consideration. Margaret Hayes wished her estate to reward responsibility, not entitlement." The whispers rose into a storm. "All of it? To Sarah? What about Mark? How could they have hidden this?" I felt every eye on me, but for once, I didn't shrink. I let their stares wash over me like a tide I no longer feared. Mark shot to his feet, his voice breaking. "This is a mistake. She doesn't deserve this. I'm the one who—" He stopped himself, realizing too late that he had nothing to point to. Nothing but excuses and debts. But before the room could dissolve into chaos, the lawyer raised a hand. "There is an addendum." His words sliced through the noise, freezing us all. He adjusted his glasses, scanning the page. Margaret Hayes included a condition. While the estate belongs solely to Sarah, she requested that if Sarah chooses to forgive her family for their treatment of her, a portion of the estate may be shared with them. The choice rests entirely with Sarah. The room tilted. Gasps gave way to silence, and all eyes turned on me again. This time, not with envy, but with hunger. My parents' faces twisted into desperate hope. Mark's hands curled into fists, his eyes blazing with rage and fear. My breath caught in my throat. Forgive them? After everything? After being thrown out, erased, betrayed? 1,000 memories collided in my mind. My father's whisper that I wasn't the child they needed. My mother's cold eyes as she handed my room away. Mark's mocking smile as he pocketed the key. And yet, here was a chance to decide not just my future, but theirs. The lawyer's voice was calm as he closed the folder. "The estate belongs to you, Miss Hayes, but the question remains, will you share it, or will you keep it?" My pulse thundered in my ears. Around the table, relatives leaned forward, waiting for my verdict. My parents' faces were pale, their pride stripped away, their desperation naked for all to see. Mark glared at me, lips trembling as though he wanted to spit venom but couldn't form the words. I lifted my gaze, meeting every eye in the room. The silence pressed in, suffocating, demanding an answer. And in that suffocating silence, I realized something. Power had shifted. For the first time in my life, the choice was mine. The room stayed frozen after the lawyer's words, every pair of eyes glued to me. It felt as though time itself waited for my answer. My parents broke first. My mother's lips trembled, her face pale, stripped of all the certainty she had wielded against me a year earlier. "Sarah, we were wrong," she whispered, her voice so fragile I almost didn't recognize it. My father shifted uncomfortably in his chair, then spoke with a quiet urgency. "We made mistakes, but we're still family. Please." Don't turn your back on us. And then Mark. He stood, his arrogance shattered, his body trembling like a child. His voice cracked as he said, "Please, Sarah, just give me something, a share, anything. I can't start over without help." His knees bent until he was on the floor, his head bowed, hands clutching at the air between us. The same brother who laughed as I dragged my suitcase out of the house now knelt before me, desperate and broken. For a long moment I said nothing. My chest tightened, emotions clawing in every direction. Rage, pity, vindication, sorrow. I thought of every sleepless night in my tiny apartment, every bowl of noodles eaten alone, every word I typed into the void, wondering if I mattered. I thought of my father's whisper. She was never the child we needed. Now here they were, kneeling in need before me. I looked around the room, at relatives who had once pitied me, who now waited for my decision as though it would define the family's fate. And then I let the question hang, not just for them, but for every invisible listener who might have shared my pain. If your parents betrayed you, would you forgive them? Or would you finally walk away? The silence after my words was deafening. My mother reached out a trembling hand, my father bowed his head, and Mark sobbed quietly on the floor. The image was almost surreal, like a painting of reversal where every role was reversed. For years, I had been the one unseen, unheard. Now, they were the ones begging for acknowledgement. I inhaled deeply, steadying my voice. "I don't need your apologies," I said softly but firmly. "They can't erase what happened. They can't undo what you did to me. But I've learned something. I don't need your approval. I don't even need your forgiveness. What I need is freedom." Mark lifted his head, eyes wet, searching for mercy. My parents leaned forward, holding their breath. But I stood straighter, my voice sharpening. "I don't want the room you stole from me. I don't need it anymore. I have the world now, and I'm not giving that up for anyone." Gasps rippled through the room. My declaration wasn't just a refusal. It was liberation. Their desperation crashed against my resolve like waves against a rock, but I didn't bend. When the lawyer confirmed the will was binding and the estate legally mine, the air shifted. My parents slumped back in their seats, defeated. Mark lowered his gaze to the floor, broken. The relatives murmured among themselves, some nodding with respect, others whispering judgment. But I felt none of it mattered anymore. The weight I had carried for years had fallen away. Weeks later, I stood in my new apartment in a city miles away. Sunlight poured through tall windows, illuminating shelves lined with books and recording equipment. It wasn't just a home, it was a studio, a sanctuary, a life I had built on my own terms. The podcast grew beyond anything I imagined. Listeners tuned in by the millions, not just to hear my story, but to share their own. I wasn't just telling my pain anymore. I was transforming it into a collective voice of resilience. In one episode, I spoke directly into the microphone, my voice steady and strong. If you've ever been betrayed by the people who were supposed to love you, if you've ever been pushed aside or told you weren't enough, this story is for you. You're not alone, and you don't need their approval to write your own future. I paused, letting the silence breathe, letting the listeners feel the weight of those words. Then I closed with the same line that had been carved into my soul. I don't need that room anymore. I have the whole world. The message spread like wildfire, clips of my words shared across social media, stitched into videos, quoted in articles. And every time someone wrote, "This saved me," or "I finally feel seen," I knew I had taken the pain of betrayal and turned it into something unbreakable. From forgotten to unstoppable, that was my story. And it was only just beginning.